Last winter, during lockdown, we had a massive maintenance list, and we got through just about all of it. But the one thing that was on the bottom of the list that we didn't manage to finish was servicing the furlers. 1 week into the new season, we were sailing up the east coast of Spain when we heard a nasty crunching sound. So we dropped anchor in Denia and investigated a bit further. Now, Amel Super Marus have two of these electric furlers, which are pretty much identical. One for the outhaul and one for the in-mast furling. And the in-mast furling one goes through the manual gearbox before turning the foil. In case of emergencies, if the electric one seizes up or doesn't work, you can actually drop that down. So to separate the two, you undo the bolts on the side and then drop it, which disengages the manual one from the electric one, and then you're free to use the manual one with a winch handle. It was then that we could actually isolate specifically where this sound was coming from, and it definitely was coming from the inside of the manual furler gearbox. So I've detached the mainsail furler, the electric one, to get to the manual one. But the only thing I was concerned about is when I take the manual one off, the whole foil with the mainsail would drop down with the sail still on it, and I was worried it was always going to get jammed in place. So what I've done is I've tied a couple of knots around the foil just under the sail, and I've lashed them over the whisker poles and down to the winch, so I've got quite a lot of tension on it now, so hopefully it'll just hold in place as I drop the manual furler off. I'm also going to take this foil section off because there's a little bit too much play between the foil and the collar, so I think that needs having a look at while I'm here. I managed to get the bolt stuck behind there and I can't get it back through, so I'm going to have to take this whole thing off and try and manipulate it a bit. It's not long enough. Got to get this whole thing turned around because I can't get those bolts out. It's off. Dust. So that's not a good start. So there's 5mm hex head or Allen head bolts in there, 6mm grub screw just in the top, which I presume holds this little bar in place, which I think I'm going to have to take out before I can take this end cap off. I've got no replacements for any of this, so I'm going to have to be really careful. So yeah, so there's a little groove for that hex head screw to go in. Very gloopy in there, but seems to be running smoothly enough. You can see, but in there's something not quite right. So we're a few days on now, and I tried as best I could to take this apart and could not do it at all. I mean, I did try and try for hours. So in the end I had to take it to a machine shop. Luckily we have some friends who are expats who don't live too far away from here, and they recommended a garage to take it to. So the garage managed to take most of it apart. I've still got the inner bit of the bearing here. This was the state of the bearing, and all the grease had just sunk into the bottom of the gearbox and completely dried that bearing out. And obviously when we started the new season, it was running dry and it's gone very brittle and basically it's knackered. So try and get hold of Amel, but I'm getting no response for them. So in the end I had to basically work out a repair kit for the whole thing. Luckily there was some really good resources on the Amel forum from people who had done it before. So I've managed to source the O-rings, the bearings and the oil seals from a company in the UK, or two companies in the UK, but now I've got to wait until they delivered. So I've had to use my friends as a delivery address, and when it arrives they're going to bring it down in their car. So it's been a bit of a logistical nightmare, but now what I need to do is clean it all up, and when the things come I can start putting it all back together again. But today what I've done is I've got a little bit of diesel from the engine, and I'm going to just clean up all this and try and take the inner section of the bearing off here, and hopefully get it to a point where we can start reassembling it. Tip of this blog is wet wipes, just baby wipes basically, and they work a treat. I mean, that's taken off all this grease here now, and it works equally as well for Sikaflex and things like that. So baby wipes. Yes. Yeah, so that's pretty knackered, but it looks like a fairly clean join down there, so I can give that a clean up and put the new one back in when I get it. But yeah, you can see the spring there is completely gone. Actually the good news is I can just get a screwdriver just under the lip there, and I'm just giving it a little tap. I'm trying not to damage the inner seal there, but if I just tap gently around I think I can see some movement, so I'm going to keep on trying. That's it. It's out. So now I've got to try and get the inner race off there. So I'm just going to try and loosen it up a bit. I'll just try and get something under there and just wheedle it out, and hopefully it'll come off like the other one did. Finally, there it is. That's the inner race. So that's the two races off without having to do any heating, so that is great. So these are the two bearings that came out, so now I just need to wait for the spare parts. Quite a bit of pitting in the shaft here. We've got a stainless steel shaft made in an aluminium coupler here, and I wonder if that's what's creating the pitting here. I wonder if it's some sort of galvanic action. Because of the extra pressure put on the foil, the bolt that attaches the foil to the furler has created a bit of a groove in there, so it's basically expanded that hole. So now I need to reinforce it. So I'll try and get a tube in there and then polyester resin to reinforce it, and then I'm going to re-drill the hole afterwards. I just want to get this off before it dries completely, because I don't want it all just sticking in place and have it impossible to remove. So I've been in there for about half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, and I put quite a lot of hardener in it. It should be ready to come off now. So I've filled the inner tube up with about 100 ml, about 3 or 4 inches of polyester resin, and then I've just filled the gap with a bit of epoxy filler just to smooth it off a bit. And now what I want to do is drill a bigger hole through and then put a plastic insert in to act as a bit of a bushing to the bolt as it turns the foil, just to stop the jarring motion and stop the creep of this hole. Now the whole bolt is going to be supported inside with the polyester resin rather than just at the edges. So the other thing I'm replacing is this sort of pad at the end of the foil, so it just acts as a bit of protection, but as you can see it's pretty far gone. So I'm going to cut out another piece out of a bit of fiberglass here, so hopefully that should be hard wearing. So finally I've got the bearings, the O-rings and the oil seals sent. I actually went for 2 sets from 2 different companies because I wasn't sure if they would get here in time and how reliable these companies are, because I'd never used them before. Both from the UK, because I tried locally and I just didn't know where to start really. Both of these companies responded within a few hours and it was next day delivery. They're worth a mention because they've been brilliant. simplybearings.co.uk and the other one is qualitybearingsonline.com. The only mistake I made was I ordered 4 tubes of grease, and what I was expecting was a tube of grease, and what I got was a mini tube of grease. So I had to go and try and find some grease locally. I've been walked for over an hour to come to Javier Marina to get some marine grease. It turns out today is the festival of St. John, or St. John's Day, which means it's a bank holiday. It's said that Spain has got more bank holidays than any other country in Western Europe. I mean, not to have a rant or go on about it or anything, but we've had 7 weeks of lockdown, and then we've had a few more weeks of restricted things opening and wearing masks to go into shops. And it's a Wednesday midweek, and so all the shops are shut apart from the cafes and restaurants. But anyway, Nerenka went yesterday, she went shopping, she found a marine store and we got some marine grease. So I've got everything I need now, I just need to put it together. The kids are off the boat, they're playing. Yesterday I had everything sorted out in my tray and Ewan knocked the whole thing over, and so we spent the next half hour just scrabbling around the cockpit floor trying to find nuts, bolts and washers and everything. So the kids are off, the kids are out of the way, and hopefully I can get this thing back together and we can get going again. This is just a bit of diesel to remove any remaining grease the salt's got in there. So I need to press this bearing onto the shaft, but I haven't got any tools to do that properly with. But what I have got is this old aluminium oar, which I'm going to cut up and modify as a banger, whatever you call it. So that's going quite smoothly. So I cut this bit of pipe down that I found in a skip because it was the exact diameter for the wear bushings for the prop shaft, and it just so happens to be the same diameter as this the inner race of this bearing here. So So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tap this bearing into place, protecting the bearing with a bit of kitchen roll there. Nicely in place. That one I've still got to knock down a bit further. So I think that little sliver of what I thought was galvanic corrosion there sits just above the bearing. So sit that way up. And it looks like what might have happened was there was some salt water just rested on the top of that bearing, has been slowly eating away at the aluminium. So I'm going to cover that in grease and take good care of that. I'll keep inspecting it anyway. So this one is proving a bit more stubborn, so I think what I'll do is I'm going to cut a hole the same diameter as that in a bit of thick wood, and I'm going to try and hammer with a soft mallet on top to try and push that bearing further on. So this one is proving a bit more stubborn, so I think what I'll do is I'm going to cut a hole the same diameter as that in a bit of thick wood, and I'm going to try and hammer with a soft mallet on top to try and push that bearing further on. Perfect fit. One of the last videos I put out, some guy was complaining that I wasn't using the right tools, that I should be using a copper mallet and all this sort of thing. So I tried to explain to him politely that when you're on a boat you've got to make do with the tools you've got on board. And if that means using a couple of bits of driftwood, then that's the tools you've got to work with. So finally I've got to get this outer race of the thrust bearing, the tapered bearing, into that bit there. So what I'm going to do with that is very gently tap it in with this soft aluminium piping. The thing with these seals with the springs in, the springs should be facing in where the oil is, and that keeps the oil in rather than water out. I've had these before and I've stored them for too long without greasing them and the spring's gone rusty. They need well packing with grease. Even if there is a breach in the oil seals, water still can get in. And this is the most vulnerable bearing because it's pointing upwards, and obviously the seawater comes down here. I never want to face another bearing like that again, the one that came out. With most jobs, if I'm putting any two metals together, particularly when it's stainless steel and aluminium, it's good to put some anti-corrosion jointing compound on. So this is just some Duralac. It's very sticky stuff as well, so I'm trying not to get it on my fingers. Upright and smooth as butter. Look at that. Can do it with a couple of fingers. Perfect. So there's the fiberglass pad I made to replace that one for the foil to sit on top of. So the last one to go on is the V45 protective cap, I think, which fits over the top of that, and that just wicks away any salt water that's trying to get in there. And then finally just got to put the pin in. This is kind of like the clutch pin or whatever to engage with the electric motor. And I've seen examples where this has been quite bent out of shape, but luckily this seems to be okay. Okay, I think we're about ready to put it back on now. So there's the kids over there. Actually, I prefer them being off the boat than on when I'm working, because tools tend to end up everywhere, and grease and mucky fingerprints and footprints. That's the other thing you've got to watch out for, is people anchoring too close. Very tight, and that's because I put that rubber insert in, or that plastic insert, to give it a bit of a bushing. I think what's happened is, when I did this before and I kind of hoisted it up to get it out, it hasn't dropped back down again, which I was hoping it would. So I'm having to kind of winch it back down so these holes match up to the manual furler, so I can get this fastened back in place. Can't get the spaces in anywhere. Option B is to attach it around the bottom of the sail and then down through this shackle and back to the winch. And that should free up the furler now. Trying to line the pin up here with the electric furler. The other thing is not to tighten these up too much, because they've got a tendency to crack. I think this one's been over tightened at some point because it's not actually gripping in. Right, that should be it. Then I tied the sail back on, I tested it, it worked, and that was job done. So we were free to set off then to the Balearic Islands. So look out for further maintenance blogs on the electric furler services, which in Almirama went horribly wrong. So thanks for watching, and thanks in particular to our patrons who make these vlogs possible. It's hot and thirsty work working down here in the engine bay, so if you'd like to buy me a nice cold beer, you can do this by following the Patreon link in the description below.